Hello and welcome to another Future Scientist video on particular diseases and conditions. So far I've spoken about the treatments for Parkinson's disease. As we know that there is no cure at the moment, but science is consistently developing new ideas and new potential cures which can actually revolutionise medicine. Now this video is going to be on lung cancer, which is quite different to Parkinson's, but equally as fascinating and equally as interesting to understand the potential cures as well as the mechanisms within itself. So if you have any other suggestions for any particular diseases you want me to do videos on, please let me know, like, comment and subscribe, and check out my Future Scientist blog or website. The link will be in the description below. So I really hope you enjoy this video. Okay, so lung cancer, also known as lung carcinoma, is perhaps one of the deadliest cancers found in the world. And that's mainly because of the fact that it spreads to different tissues and different organs incredibly quickly, or in other words, it metastasizes at a very fast rate. Now, because of this, it's very difficult to diagnose, especially because the symptoms don't directly relate to the lungs. For example, swelling of the face, or change in your voice, or rapid weight loss. All of those don't seem to directly link to your respiratory system. Now, speaking of the respiratory system, let's try to understand it before we look at the cancer in the lungs themselves. So we know that the respiratory system consists of the trachea and then branches down into the two lung sacs via the bronchi and then the bronchioles, and then we have the gaseous exchange surface that we know as the alveoli. Now, it's a very efficient system in which we need in order to obtain the oxygen for metabolic processes, for general movement, for in general everything really, because all cells require oxygen to respire and to pursue their function of secretion and other functions such as contraction. Now we understand the general mechanisms of the respiratory system, let's understand why we get lung cancer. So we know with all cancers it's mainly to do with a particular mutation, whether it be in the gene caused by the genes directly or by environmental factors. But either way, we know that there's something has gone wrong with the coding or the base sequence within your genes or your DNA. As a result of this, you have a rapid division of cancerous cells until you have a mass tumour. Now, what kind of cells does this happen in for the lungs? Well, this is the epithelial cells. Now, the epithelial cells are essential because they line the lungs. They are responsible, some of them, such as goblet cells, are responsible for the secretion of mucin or mucus. And then we have other cells, such as cilia, which contain hair-like projections, which move this mucus, which is trapping your dust, your bacteria, anything that could potentially harm your respiratory system or cause infection, and brushes it up the trachea and sends it down into your esophagus, where enzymes, catalytic enzymes, will break down these bacteria and deteriorate them. So essentially no harm comes to you. Now, there are other types of epithelial cells that we're not quite familiar with. Now, the first is called basal epithelial cell, and this differentiates into goblet or ciliated cells. So it's important because you need to consistently replace any cells which have died or have become damaged due to mutation. Now, the second type of epithelial cell is called a club cell. Now, club cell, essentially called the club because it looks like one, is responsible for protecting the epithelium and is quite close to the base membrane found within the epithelial tissue. Now, the final type of epithelial cell, which we may not be common with, is called the neuroendocrine epithelial cell. And as mentioned previously, this is also something that is found near the base membrane, and it is responsible for secreting hormones into your bloodstream. That's the reason why it needs to be near to a basement membrane, so it will reduce the diffusion distance between the membrane and the cell surface membrane of that particular cell. So there's loads and loads and loads of different epithelial cells, and that is one of the reasons why it's rather difficult to diagnose lung cancer, because the types of lung cancer are quite varied. Now, we can categorise lung cancer in two separate groups. So you have the non-small cell and we have the small cell lung cancer. Now, small cell lung cancer is a lot more severe, mainly because of the fact that it metastasizes faster, and that means that it can spread to different tissues and different organs at a faster rate. And when we're trying to treat lung cancer, what we want to do is we want to target it before it has spread to other tissues. We want to target it when it's confined and limited to a particular region of your lungs. Because once it's spread, it becomes rather difficult to use surgery to remove all the tumour, and very emotionally draining and physically draining for your patient if you use things such as chemotherapy, mainly because chemotherapy doesn't just affect the region which is cancerous, but remember, your blood is carrying oxygen around your whole body, so it's also carrying around the chemicals within the bloodstream to these different parts of your body, which can have other side effects, which isn't very pleasant. So we know that small cell cancer usually is more severe. Additionally, with small cell cancer, it is more likely you'll get it if you smoke. Whereas non-small cell cancer varies. So usually tobacco does have an impact, but there are other ways to get lung cancer apart from the obvious smoking cigarettes. So before I go on, let's explain what a metastasis is. So how does it develop? So once you have your ball or mass of tumour cells, what happens is it can either be benign or it can be malignant. Benign means that essentially it's no harm. It could pose particular threats in its confined region, but it cannot spread to other organs and tissues, which is quite a relief for many patients who are diagnosed with cancer. However, malignant tumours are actually, malignant tumours are actually able to spread to other parts of your body, which is problematic because as it spreads, you're more likely to experience more symptoms, it's difficult to contain, and more difficult to treat. Now, how does it work? So with malignant tumours, what happens is they need a supply of nutrients, just like any cell does. So what they do is they release certain chemicals which will in the tissue, in the host tissue, and this will stimulate the turning on of particular genes which code for the production of a blood vessel. Now this is really fascinating because the whole complexity of it is that though these cells are cancerous, they still have quite or equal ability as any normal cell, and in the wrong situation such as cancer, it can be rather severe. So thinking about it, if cancer cells alone can do this, we can harness the same kind of power that cancer cells have and use it for good, perhaps even using cancer cells to cure cancer cells, if we're able to actually understand the genome coding between each of these cells. Anyway, so what happens is a blood vessel will develop, and these cells will obviously rely on this constant blood source for nutrients, and they'll grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, they will grow so big that they will reach the basement membrane. And the basement membrane is basically the source in which provides nutrients for these epithelial cells, for the tissues within the epithelial cells. And once it reaches basement membrane, it can break through into the membrane and then can be transported via the bloodstream to other parts of your body. Now, there are many different parts of your body, and including things such as your brain, your lymph nodes, cavities, your bones. And so the problem with lung cancer is that it can essentially impact many different places and very quickly. Okay, so the process in which these tumour cells actually stimulate the production of these blood vessels is known as angiogenesis, and that's quite an important factor of why malignant tumours are so dangerous. So maybe perhaps we should stop the cell's ability to actually stimulate angiogenesis. Then surely it will simply remain benign, we wouldn't have a problem. Now there's so many questions to answer and so many different research points which we can take this from. So I'm going to put another video on future cures, as mentioned, because you know that it's really important to look to the future. Otherwise I'll be talking in this video forever about loads of different cures, and we should be focusing on the mechanisms of lung cancer. So going back to what this video is actually meant to be about, the the actual ways in which you can get lung cancer, so the symptoms. So we've spoken about how severe it can be and the mechanisms of lung cancer. Now, the symptoms. So we always assume as soon as we hear lung cancer, we think tobacco, we think cigarettes. And that's right, it's one of the main killers. And it's obviously, if you do smoke, you know that that's one of a potential drawback, even though there is no, I personally wouldn't see anything that is particularly good about it. You're inserting carcinogens and nicotine into your body, essentially entirely destroying yourself. Now, other ways in which you can get lung cancer. So what other chemicals actually affect lung cancer? So obviously I wasn't quite sure about this. I knew of particular chemicals, radon is a typical example, but others include things such as so gene association. So you wouldn't really think of it like that though. You wouldn't think that your genes are responsible for lung cancer, but particular mutations, it seems right. Okay, so another factor is air pollution. So for example, diesel, sorry, I don't know why I said that, diesel. So it's not just limited to the cigarettes, and also secondhand smoking. I mean, you will pass someone and you inhale all those chemicals, you're also prone to actually obtaining lung cancer, and that's the sad reality of it all. We can't stop these mutations, but what we can do is actually understand these mutations and counteract them. Okay, so as mentioned earlier on, we know that there's small cell carcinomas or small cell lung cancer, and then we have non-small cell carcinomas. Now, we know small cell carcinomas are more severe, but what do they derive from? So they usually derive from neuroendocrine epithelial cells, and these are usually immature, and they usually occur in the centre of the lungs, so usually where the lobar is, and from there it grows and spreads to other parts of your body. Now, with these, you can actually, these tumour cells don't just sit there and divide. They have this similar abilities as any of your other cells. They are able to secrete hormones or substances. So carcinomas that are able to actually secrete hormones and substances can actually cause people to obtain what we call carcinoneoplastic syndrome. And a typical example is when a particular hormone is released which can affect the adrenal gland, and it causes it to release a substance called cortisol. Now, cortisol can actually lead to what we call Cushing syndrome. Now, Cushing syndrome. Now, Cushing syndrome is basically a type of syndrome in which can affect your glucose concentration in the blood and increases or heightens your blood pressure. Okay, so another thing that these small cell carcinomas can do is they can stimulate the formation of autoantibodies. And these type of antibodies are able to destroy your neurons, and this can lead to LEM syndrome, which is a type 2 hypersensitivity syndrome. So that is small cell carcinomas. So what about non-small cell carcinomas? So there's loads of different types of non-small cell carcinomas. So we have as known as the adenocarcinomas, and this is basically a development of glandular cells which are able to secrete mucin. We also have other types of non-small cell carcinomas that are able to secrete keratin. Example of this is the squamous carcinomas. We also have carcinoid carcinomas, and we have which develop from mature neuroendocrine epithelial cells, and then we have large cell carcinomas as well. So there's loads of different types, and they all have like different impacts. So for example, squamous cell carcinomas, these can actually lead to bone degeneration because it actually prevents calcium being used up for your bones and increases the concentration of calcium in your bloodstream, and that's obviously not a very good impact. Okay, so now we've understood the different types of lung cancer, let's actually discuss the ways in which we diagnose. So we know that there's loads of different ways to scan for lung cancer. So we have the typical X-ray, chest X-ray scans, we have CT scans, we have MRI scans, which uses radiation, and we have PET scans, and this is kind of not as common. It analyses the energy uptake of particular cells, and obviously if malignant tumour cells are taking in nutrients from the bloodstream, they'll obviously be using up a lot of energy. and obviously for metabolic processes as well. So you can use that to analyse and identify different types of tumourous cells. Now, in terms of actually what it looks like on a chest X-ray or a CT scan, it varies depending on the type of lung cancer. But if it's found on a particular segment or particular branch, it looks rather berry-shaped. And I read an article describing the identification of a lung tumour as a coin lesion on a chest X-ray. So it really does require quite a lot of skill to identify a tumour, because it's not always easy. You can easily confuse it with tuberculosis or pneumonia, but you could also be argued that lung cancer can cause pneumonia. So then again, there's a lot of skill and analysis that is required in the radiology department, which is rather inspiring. In order to actually identify the stage of lung cancer, we use the mnemonic T and M. T standing for tumour size, N standing for node, so how close it is to the nose, and M standing for metastasis. So is it confined or has it spread to other organs? Now, there are different ranges. So for the tumour size, it ranges from T0 to T4. For the nodes, it ranges from N0 to N3, and for M, it ranges from M0 to M1. So depending on these different rankings, you get different stage rankings too. So stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Say your tumour had metastasized and was M1, you'd call it stage 4. Say you had a tumour size ranked 2, no metastasis, and a node ranking of 2, it will probably be stage 2. So you kind of get the kind of idea. That is essentially how doctors begin to diagnose lung cancer. Now, in terms of the treatments, we know that there's different types, highly dependent on the type of lung cancer you have. Now, we know there's chemotherapy, treatment is also radiotherapy. Now, so let's discuss surgery. So with surgery, different types of surgery are used depending on how spread out in a localized region your tumour or cancer is. So say it's found on a regional lobe, in a particular lobe, you can narrow down the surgery to 2 types. So you can have a segment resection, or you can have what we call a wedge resection. Now, wedge resection is where your tumour is found slightly near the end of a branch or a bronchiole, and this is perhaps one of the easiest. You remove the tumour and any kind of surrounding healthy cells, hoping that the healthy cells will grow back and the tumour won't. Now, with a segment resection, you're removing an entire segment in a particular lobe. Yet again, you're hoping that the healthy cells will grow back normally. So what happens when it has spread throughout all of the lobes in one lung sac? This is known as a pneumonectomy. Now, what happens is you have to sew up the airway to prevent any air leaking into the chest cavity, because obviously this is particularly dangerous. And once you've actually removed the lung sac, you need to sew up the airway to prevent air flowing into the chest cavity or pleural cavity, because this can actually lead to the lung collapsing. When you think about it, if the pressure, as the pressure increases in the cavity, this could lead to the actual lungs collapsing as a result. So that's kind of surgery, but if it has spread to other parts or the other lung sac, then or other regions of your body, it becomes more difficult to apply surgery. So instead, we apply radiotherapy. Now, radiotherapy involves using radiation to destroy the cancerous cells. Now, this has to be highly specific because you want to limit the damage to any of the surrounding healthy cells. But yet again, this is also particularly problematic because you have the skin, epithelial layers, and then you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper until you reach the cancerous cells. So there will always be some damage to the skin and to layers below it, and it is up to the patient to decide whether it's actually worth it. And I think an important role of being a doctor is deciding with your patient rather than deciding for your patient. Now, the last and perhaps one of the types of treatments which I find most sad to talk about is chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy, when you think about it logically, you're inserting poison into your bodies, and is it a life worth living to insert these chemicals which could potentially limit your quality of life, because these chemicals are being inserted into your bloodstream and they're going to all the different organs and all the different tissues and making you lack appetite, making you feel fatigue, and there's so many other side effects. Would it be better just to leave someone to die or deteriorate, or would it be worth going through the chemotherapy? That's something, yet again, an ethical debate which some people need to discuss with their, or some doctors need to discuss with their patients before immediately deciding what is right for them. Okay, just to end this video on an interesting note, I want to recommend this book. It's called When Breath Comes to Air by Paul Clancy. It's about a neurosurgeon, obviously Paul Clancy. He was an amazing neurosurgeon, saved millions of lives, but then got diagnosed with lung cancer. And his whole life turned upside down for him. He was so used to having the power of actually being the one to comfort patients and to encourage them and to be optimistic. And to be put in the shoes of a patient gave him such a different perspective. And with his lung cancer, unfortunately he died of lung cancer after 3 years. He initially was found to have a mutation called EGFR, and there was an actual pill for it that could actually pinpoint that mutation and actually prevent it from causing a continual division of these cells, and it's called Tacovera. Now, this was working for quite a long while, but as most medication, eventually wears off, and he obviously got he went through second level treatment, which is chemotherapy. Chemotherapy made him incredibly ill, incredibly weak, and he felt as though he had lost his responsibility and became frail and fragile. He then obviously, the chemotherapy had such a bad impact on him, it affected his gastrointestinal system, he began vomiting bile, and all of that. It just shows the severity of lung cancer and how unfortunate it is for people who had so much going for them, like ambition and passion and thinking, especially as a doctor, to help a patient. You have so much responsibility, you don't really imagine yourself in those shoes, and when you reach that line where you need someone to give you hope, someone who can comfort you, someone who you can trust, even though the mere matter of the fact is you may die in a couple of years. And it's such a sensitive topic, and I feel like I really recommend this book because it doesn't just show you about the mechanisms of lung cancer, but how anyone would deal with it, and especially how a doctor would deal with it, considering that they're used to having that power. So, yes, again, you can get it from Amazon, eBay, any bookstore. If you ask the library, I'm sure they'll have it in stock. So I really recommend it, and I hope you guys read it if you have the time. Well, that's the end of the Future Scientist lung cancer video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned some new facts. If you have any questions, comment down and let me know. Also, check out my Future Scientist blog or website for any extra information, medical debates, or cancer in general, or an optimistic future to cures. Anything that you want to answer, let me know, and I'll make a video or a blog post on it. As mentioned, I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and like, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!